Hey friends, it's Tomer, and in this video we're going to be checking out Revenant Recon, a brand new commander pre-constructed deck coming out with Murders at Karlov Manor. This is a Dimir Reanimator deck whose main gimmick is revolved around the Surveil mechanic. There's a lot of cards that either surveil or care about surveilling. So in this video we're going to check out the entire deck list, starting with the 11 brand new cards that are exclusive to this deck, and then we're going to check out the reprints, starting with the most expensive reprints, and then quickly look through the rest of the deck list, and then finally, I'll give my closing thoughts on the deck as a whole. But before we begin, a quick reminder, you can buy these sweet new precons over at our sponsor, cardkingdom.com/MTG Goldfish. Alright, we begin with the face commander of the deck, Mirko, Obsessive Theorist. This is a 3-mana Dimir 1/3 legendary creature vampire detective. It has flying and vigilance, and whenever you surveil, put a +1/+1 counter on Mirko, and at the beginning of your end step, you may return target creature card with power less than Mirko's from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. And a finality counter is a recurring mechanic. It was first introduced in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, I believe, so very recently. Basically, if a creature has a finality counter on it, if it would leave the battlefield, you exile it instead. That's what finality is. So this basically tells you what this deck is all about. It's all about surveilling and reanimating. It's more focused on reanimating as a whole because surveil is a pretty small keyword pool to play with, but its main gimmick is surveil. So it has a bunch of cards that either surveil or care about surveilling, and it ties perfectly into our Reanimator main theme, because surveilling will put creatures into our graveyard and then we can then reanimate them later. So both themes kind of bleed into each other, and it's a really cool take on the Reanimator archetype. So Mirko is the perfect leader for the deck, but if you want to start building around him from scratch, I have a bunch of upgrades that I would suggest. First of all, Mirko reanimates based on his power, and you don't actually have to surveil a bunch to pump up Mirko's power. You can do so with other cards like equipment, like Blackblade Reforged, to really pump him up, and then you can reanimate basically whatever you want. You can also double the amount of reanimation you're doing every single end step with cards like Strionic Resonator. But the coolest thing I like about finality counters is they don't actually have to be final for your creatures. There's a lot of cards like Hex Parasite or whatever that can remove counters from your own creatures so that you can keep reanimating them over and over again. But I like even more are the cards that you can move counters from your creatures over to your opponent's creatures. Cards like Nesting Grounds can move the finality counter from your creatures that you reanimate with Mirko Vosk and then put it over to your opponent's creatures, so when those creatures die, they're exiled instead, so no recursion for your opponents. It's very cheeky and I really love it. I think the Alzilith and Nesting Grounds are the two best ways of doing it. Nesting Grounds just fits really well into the deck in general because it just costs a land slot, so it's super easy to slot in there. So really cool ways of building around finality. Moving on, we have the secondary commander for the deck. It's Marvo, Deep Operative. It's an Octopus Rogue, so I absolutely love it. It's my favorite commander, 10 out of 10. It's a 5-mana Dimir 1/8 legendary creature, Octopus Rogue, and whenever it attacks clash with defending player, whenever you win a clash, draw a card, then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value 8 or less without paying its mana cost. Flavorfully, this is freaking awesome. It's using one of its tentacles to grab one of the things. It can only cast mana value 8 or less because it has 8 limbs. This is really cute. An Octopus Rogue, I mean, I love it already. I don't even really care about the text. But if we were building around it, it's not really great as a face commander for the precon because this deck is all about surveil and Marvo's about clash. And for those who don't know about clash, it's an old mechanic from the original Lorwyn block. It only showed up there, and I don't think it really showed up afterwards because it wasn't a very popular or good mechanic. What clash does is basically when you clash with an opponent, you and that opponent each reveal the top card of your library, and then whoever wins the clash is the person who reveals the higher mana value card, and then afterwards you can either keep that card on top or put it on the bottom of your library. So the clash cards kind of suck. You really have to win for them to be even worth casting, and even then most of them still kind of suck, but obviously they work really well in decks that have a lot of top deck manipulation. So if you have a lot of high mana value cards in your deck and you have a mechanic like Surveil, which can alter what is on top of your deck at any given time, then the clash cards get at least more consistent. Not good, but consistent. But Marvo actually makes them pretty darn good. There's not a lot of flash cards in general, even less so in blue and black, but the best ones are definitely going to be Research the Deep and Revive the Fallen. They give you a minor benefit, but if you win the clash, you get to put it back into your hand so you can recast them over and over again. In a Surveil deck or any deck that cares about a lot of top deck manipulation, you're most likely going to win the clash, hopefully, and then you get to recast them over and over again for 2 mana. But the main payoff is whenever you're winning a clash, Marvo gets to cast like an actual good spell from your hand for free, and that's the main thing. You get to draw cards, you get to cast spells with for free with Marvo, and then just focus on basically getting these 2 cards in your deck so you can start popping off a little bit. So basically just tutor up Research the Deep, Revive the Fallen, start casting with Marvo out, and then cast your better spells and draw cards in the process. That's basically the game plan here. Moving on, we have Copy Catchers. So say 2 mana blue, 2/1 fairy with flying, and it says whenever you Surveil, you may pay 2 mana, 1 in a blue. If you do, create a token that's a copy of Copy Catchers. So this is a payoff for the Surveil mechanic. There's very few Surveil payoff cards before this precon was ever printed. So all of the new cards, basically to make this precon work, for like to make Surveil work in a 99 card singleton format, they're either going to be Surveil cards or cards that pay off for surveilling, because the archetype is kind of non-existent up until this point, so it really needs a lot of help to bring it up to commander quality. Copy Catchers is pretty decent. It's a 2/1 flyer by itself, which kind of sucks, but then once you're surveilling and you have a lot of mana available to you, you can make an army of them very quickly. Like each of the token copies also has that ability, so you can grow exponentially if you have enough mana to start copying them. It's not very good, honestly, but like it puts a lot of chump blockers on the battlefield, and if you have like Skull Clamp or whatever, then it turns into card draw kind of efficiently. Like you pay 3 mana each time for a divination. That's okay, whatever. Moving on, we have Final Word Phantom. This is a 3 mana blue, 1/4 creature spirit detective, and it has flash and flying, and during each of your opponent's end steps, you may cast spells as though they had flash. So this is a very mana efficient flash enabler for your deck. Usually flash enablers are like 4 mana, but it does have the restriction of timing that you can only play them at your opponent's end step, not just whenever you want on their turn. But this card is just absolutely fantastic in a bunch of decks. It's okay here, because there is a little bit of a draw go element in this deck going on too, but it's even better in decks that really care about flash. So like Kadena Slinking Sorcerer, flash is the best thing you could possibly do, because every single time you enable flash, that means instead of Kadena letting you cast a morph card or cloak disguise card for free on your turn, instead you can play one for free on everybody's turn, so it gets so much stronger. Kadena scales so well with flash. And then other cards that care about flash, like Alila, Hateful Provocateur. The art is hard to read, but trust me, it works really well with flash. And then Nimrus, Una's Trickster, also works very well with flash too, allowing you to draw some cards and have a little bit of card selection in the process too. So Final Word Phantom, one of the best cards in the entire deck, though it is going to be more powerful in other decks that care more specifically about flash enablers. Moving on, we have Unshakable Tail. This is a 3 mana black, 3/2 creature zombie detective. When it enters the battlefield and at the beginning of your upkeep, Surveil 1, and then whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from your library, investigate. Then you can pay 2 mana, sacrifice a clue, return it from your graveyard to your hand. So this is a nice reliable Surveil engine, and also it's going to be generating a bunch of clue tokens. That's a lot of value for a 3-drop. And then the cherry on top is that, like, if you mill it, if you Surveil it or whatever, or if it just dies, you can always return it back to your hand and recast it later. So it's very consistent, and this card is going to be like the bread and butter of your Surveil deck. It's going to be what helps make it tick, but it's also going to be super useful in other decks as well too. Sidisi Brood Tyrant is going to be fantastic optimistic with this card because you're going to be self-milling a whole bunch and you want to focus very heavily on creatures. So most likely you're going to be milling your creatures away, and then you're going to make zombies, but then you're also going to be investigating at the same time too. Thanos, Solemn Survivor, is a commander that I don't think I've ever seen actually played, but it is a very nice card for the Unshakable Tail. Probably the best home for it, honestly. It cares about milling, it cares about sacrificing artifact tokens, which the Unshakable Tail provides, so you're really getting all maximum value out of this card out of it. And then other self-mill cards like Grist the Hunger Tide can also make use out of the Unshakable Tail. So this card is just a nice little engine for like a bunch of different self-mill decks, but they have to be creature heavy. Next, we have Watcher of Hours. This is a 6 mana blue 6/6 creature Sphinx, flying ward 3, and it has whenever you remove a time counter from Watcher of the Hours while it's exiled, Surveil 1, and it has suspend 6, 2 mana. So you generally never want to actually hard cast this. It's a decent Reanimator target because it's a 6/6 flyer, but its main value is the fact that it just sits in the exile zone with time counters on it, and it's going to be surveilling for you very consistently for just 2 mana, and it's hard to interact with. And then eventually, you know, like after 6 turns, you're going to finally get a 6/6 flyer ward 3 after the time you've already established and you've surveilled a whole bunch, and you don't really need that surveil that much afterwards. So it is semi-flexible. It's a good workhorse in the Surveil deck, but I really wouldn't run it anywhere else. Then we've got Eye of Duskmantle, another card that is just for the Surveil deck, aka Justice Precon. It's a 7 mana black 3/8 creature Eye. I love it. Eyes are so cool. Flying lifelink. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards in your graveyard if you've surveilled this turn. If you cast a spell this way, you pay life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So this card just is good reanimation for the Surveil deck, and that's it. It's like really good there and nowhere else, basically. And it's particularly good with our commander because it has only 3 power, and Mirko reanimates based on power, so you don't have to buff up Mirko that much to start reanimating it out of the graveyard, and that's the best case scenario for this card, honestly. Yeah, it's just for our commander, basically. It just has no real use outside of that, I don't think. Moving on, we have Counterpoint. This is a card that is actually playable outside of this precon. It's a 5 mana, 3 and blue and black, so Dimir instant, and it says counter target spell, you may cast a creature, instant, sorcery, or planeswalker spell from your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to that spell's mana value without paying its mana cost. So this is a really expensive counterspell. However, if you have enough mana to keep up 5 mana on your opponent's turn and not feel terrible about it, it can be a super efficient removal spell like Interaction. It's a counterspell that also can cast a spell from your graveyard at the same time too. So it could even put you up in mana in terms of value wise, and it's a 2-for-1. It's comparable to Counterlash. I think Counterlash was like the first card that did something similar to this, except Counterlash costs 1 more mana and it's a lot worse because let's say you're like a Spellslinger deck, which is the most likely spot where you're going to be playing Counterpoint, countering like a creature spell. You're not able to cast any creatures from your hand. You'll feel really bad. This one is more reliable and cheaper, so it's a little bit better. It's still clunky though. You really need to have it in a Drago deck because otherwise keeping 5 mana up is going to be really difficult for most decks. But if you are in a Drago deck like Dralnu, Lich Lord, or again, Alila, Artful Provocateur with that interesting artwork, then yeah, this card could be pretty sweet in those decks. Then we've got Charnel Serenade. This is a 6 mana black sorcery that says Surveil 3, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Exile it with 3 time counters on it, or exile Charnel Serenade with 3 time counters on it. And it has to spend 3, 2, and a black, so 3 mana total. This is just another card that you're only going to run in a Surveil deck, and that's basically it. I mean, the suspend part is kind of interesting, so maybe a Doctor Who combination that cares about timey-wiminess might like this card too as well, but its main purpose is to support the Surveil archetype, specifically with Mirko as the helm. Yeah, it's okay. Next up, we have a really cute card. It's a Foreboding Steamboat, and that is just like my favorite card name in a while. That's just, I love it so much. Chef's kiss. It's a 5 mana black vehicle. It's a 5/7 vehicle, and it says when it enters the battlefield, each player chooses 2 non-token, non-vehicle creatures they control, exile them until Foreboding Steamboat leaves the battlefield, and then whenever it attacks, you put a card exiled with it into its owner's graveyard, and if you do, investigate, and it has crew too. So this is just like a nice removal spell, like a soft board wipe for the table, but it's mostly cuteness on it, honestly. It investigates, so like a Clue style black deck might want this as well too, but it just like clears up the board a little bit, and it dodges non-token creatures and vehicles, which is really relevant. Like if you're playing against a token deck, making them sacrifice 2 tokens is not really relevant, but this is going to get around that a little bit. I think its greatest home is going to be Greasefang Okiba Boss. It's a black commander that deals with vehicles, so it has vehicle synergies built in. And yeah, it's just cute. I just like the name. I like the art. Foreboding Steamboat is just a funny idea in my brain to think about. So yeah, 10 out of 10. Then we've got Case of the Shifting Visage. Visage? I don't know how to say it. Let me know in the comment section. It's a 3 mana blue case, and that's a new set mechanic. It's a new type of enchantment, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1, and then to solve, if there are 15 or more cards in your graveyard, you get to solve it at the beginning of your end step. And then when it is solved, whenever you cast a non-legendary creature spell, copy that spell. So the solve part of this enchantment is really, really good, and it's obviously really good in like a self-mill deck. So your first part of it, Surveil 1, that's fantastic. In the Surveil deck, you really need Surveil engines to make your Surveil Manors cards work. So already the 3 mana upkeep Surveil 1 is already quite useful, not good, but useful in the deck. And then you're going to very easily have 15 plus cards in your graveyard. And then the solved part of it for the rest of the game, you just get to double up on your creature spells. Like that is actually really, really powerful. So this card is absolutely fantastic, slam dunk good in this particular deck. It's slightly worse in like self-mill Reanimator decks like Sidisi, but it's still going to be absolutely fantastic. Like just like imagine Sidisi or any sort of self-mill Reanimator deck, easily putting this down for 3 mana, easily solving it, and then the rest of the time you're just casting and doubling the value out of your creature cards. Yeah, that's really good. So this is really good in multiple decks. So those were all the brand new cards exclusive to the new deck, and now we're going to be talking about the reprints, the rest of the cards that you're going to find in the deck list, and we're starting with the 4 most expensive reprints in the deck. And keep in mind, all of these artworks and cards, they're not going to be the exact same versions you're going to be getting in the precon. These are like the cheapest versions of those cards that you can find to better illustrate the reprint value. So the top 4 cards are all over $10 right now. They're going to go down in price once the precons come out, but it showcases that the reprints are actually pretty darn solid. So the most exciting one is Necromancy. I don't think it's ever gotten a reprint with the Oracle text, with like the modern text, and I'm gonna have it pop on the screen right now to show what it looks like. It's still very confusing even with the modern text, but nonetheless, it's an amazing card and it's a great reprint. We've also got Reanimate, another staple card for the Reanimator deck, and then we have the Mass Reanimator Finisher, Rise of the Dark Realms. That's also great to see. And then we have Phyrexian Metamorph. That doesn't deal with reanimation or anything, but it's a really nice flexible clone effect. It clones any artifact or creature for 3 mana, and you just lose 2 life. So yeah, these are just like amazing cards that have been reprinted. Generally speaking, the entire cycle got like really good reprints overall, except for the lands. The lands are disappointing. They work, but they're not like super exciting or anything. But in terms of reprints, they really nailed it here with these precons. So now we're going to move on to the rest of the reprints. I'm just starting from category to category, like card type to card type. So I'm starting with creatures and then like artifacts, enchantments, spells, you know, all that sort of stuff. And we're starting from lowest mana value to highest. So I'm just going to quickly go over them and just give my thoughts in terms of how they work in the precon. Thoughtbound Phantasm is one of the few cards that care about surveilling, so it's cool to see here. It's an early defender that grows. Baleful Strix is a fantastic early blocker and just a nice card advantage because you can 2-for-1 very easily if anybody tries to attack into it because it draws a card on ETB. Dimir Spybug is another card that is like, it's like okay, it's not really exciting or anything, but it cares about surveil, so it's here. Dogged Detective is not a detective, and it really deserves an errata at this point because it even has the hat, so therefore it is a detective. But it ETB surveils, so you know it's good with the deck's theme. Then we've got Lazav the Multifarious. It ETB surveils. It can turn into creatures that you have in the graveyard. Is perfect for this precon. Nightveil Sprite is repeatable surveil on a creature. You love to see it. Sinister Starfish, same thing, just 2 mana. Surveil enablers every single turn is just great to see in the deck. Whispering Snitch turns that surveilling you're doing into a little bit of drain on your opponents, which is amazing to see here. So we're really going ham on the surveil mechanic. Again, Master of Death, another surveil card. Anthem Mutineer is a card you want to be pitching to your graveyard, self-milling away, and then you get to encore it and have a sweet removal. Revenant Chupacabra, early on, you know, you kill something, and then later on you can reanimate it with Mirko very easily. Twilight Prophet, I remember this card used to be really expensive. It's no longer that expensive, and I think it's always been a little bit overrated, but it's card draw and drain all on a card. Then we have Vizier of Many Faces. It can be embalmed from the graveyard, so it works really well with Reanimator. Doom Whisper is one of the strongest surveil cards ever printed. It's just like generically very good, but it's particularly great if you care about filling your graveyard as quickly as possible and surveilling a whole bunch of times. Mulldrifter, you can evoke it, draw 2 cards, and then reanimate it. That's great. Same thing with Shriekmaw. So we're focusing mostly on stuff going into the graveyard and then getting benefit from the graveyard. Same with Sir Conran, like this is a self-mill deck, so this is another finisher for the self-mill deck. Dream Eater, ETB surveils. It's a big boy. It's a 6-drop and it bounces, so it's a little bit of interaction here. Grave Titan, it's an oldie but a goodie. I think it's a little bit overrated these days, but you know, it's a really good reanimate target. Massacre Worm is another great little board wipe. It deals with small creatures and then can also double up as a finisher. Overseer of the Damned, ETB, blow something up and make an army. That's really great. Sphinx of the Second Sun, I'm not quite sure why it's here because like Mirko's ability is an end step trigger, I believe. So it doesn't give you another end step trigger. It draws you a card, and I guess it's like a random reanimator target. There's Brainstorm, there's Consider is surveil, so that's nice. Otherworldly Gaze has an updated text where it just says surveil 3, and it has flashback. Black Sun Zenith, this is an old school board wipe. I remember when this card used to be jammed in a bunch of black decks in like 2011. Curate also had its card text changed to just being surveil. Mission Briefing, surveils and flashbacks. Ephara's Dispersal, surveil and bounce. Notion Rain, surveil and draw. Toxic Deluge, a staple board wipe, love to see it here. Deep Analysis can be surveilled, self-milled away, and then you can flash it back for a more mana efficient cost. Pile On is surveil, convoke, destroy. That's amazing. Price of Fame, also amazing here. 2 mana essentially if you're destroying a legendary creature and then get to surveil. Discovery Dispersal, another surveil card that is flexible. Connive Concoct, another surveil card that is flexible. Everflowing Chalice is just a nice mana rock. Then we got Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, the Mirror Signet, just staple mana rocks, Mind Stone, Talisman of Dominance, Thought Vessel, just, you know, it's what you expect. Animate Dead is another fantastic new reprint here. Just amazing in any graveyard heavy deck. Enhanced Surveillance is just awesome in a surveil deck because you get to surveil 2 extra times. Disinformation Campaign, I remember when this card used to be the linchpin of like the mirror archetype in Limited. You would jam basically every single surveil card you could, and then Disinformation Command would just absolutely grind down your opponent. It was super, super fun. For X and Arena, I think it's overrated, but sure, it's over here too. And that's basically it. The rest of the deck is just lands, and like I said, the lands are all just not very exciting. They're serviceable, they'll work just fine, but there's no like exciting reprints here to speak about. There's like a Reliquary Tower, that's the most expensive one, but it just gets the job done. So yeah, that is the entire deck list. It's very heavy on Surveil, which I love to see because it is an archetype with a very small card pool, and they left out a couple Surveil cards, but nothing you would actually truly miss, honestly. They got all the really important ones in there. And the graveyard and self-mill themes are very well supported. A lot of really good reprints here. So yeah, overall, I think the deck is really well done. Some of the Surveil cards are obviously kind of janky. They're just, you know, pretty low power, but they have Surveil on them, so they show up. So they're kind of sucky by themselves, but when you have the Surveil payoffs, they're absolutely fine. I'm happy with this deck. It's a Graveyard Matters deck, which we've seen a bunch before in Commander, but it has a Surveil twist to it, and it really goes ham on Surveil, so it does feel a little bit more unique. So now that I've covered all 4 of the brand new Commander precons, it's time to rank them and then rank all the brand new Commanders coming out in the set. So stay tuned next week for a full precon breakdown and comparison and a tier list on all of them, all 4 of them. And then also I'm going to be ranking and tier listing every single commander from the set too. That's going to be a doozy. Like and subscribe if you want to see that coming up next week. All right, until then, friends, see ya.